Hi, everyone. I know I'm a new face up here. My name is Joseph Wilson, and I have the honor and the privilege to serve you all here as our building coordinator. You may ask, what does that mean? What is building coordinator? I get the honor and privilege of praying over these seats every week as we set them. I get the honor and privilege of being the face of the Bridge Fellowship outside of these walls with many contractors that come in and fix things in the building, but also with the building expansion, I get to meet with contractors and architects and engineers, and it's just been an honor and a privilege to be here. Today is my birthday, and I can't think of a better way to spend my birthday than to be here with you all this morning. So you'll learn a little bit more about my story as we travel on through the sermon today, but we're going to be continuing in 1 Samuel 25, so if you want to go ahead and turn there in your Bibles. My call to ministry sort of started in high school. I felt very pulled in high school to serve in vocational ministry, and very similarly to David's story, I just got this position 2.5 years ago. So it's been quite a journey to get to this place. But we're here, and I am super honored and blessed that I get to spend my birthday bringing the word with you all this morning. So if you are new here today, please don't be shy. Please come and meet me up front. I would love to get to know you, love to see how we can get you plugged in here and just hear your story. But also all of our staff would like to get to know you. So if you could find someone in the lobby with a lanyard on, we would love to say hi. We would love to, like I said, just get to hear a little bit of your story and see how we can grow together in our relationships. But if you are new as well, I'm going to catch you up on what we've talked about the last couple of weeks. 2 weeks ago, we heard from Daryl Crouch about how David was in a cave and he was in a very dark place in his life. Saul had been chasing him, obviously trying to kill him because of Saul's pride. And we saw a beautiful psalm that David had written, and what a gift the Psalms are. It's a look into David's journal. But we got to see that. And then last week we learned about living right even when we have been wronged. Nolan brought a fantastic word. And so moving forward, last week we saw David make a very wise choice. This week we're going to see him almost make a super foolish choice. And that is sort of leads to the two choices that we can make when things don't really go the way that we think they should go. So things that happen in our lives that we think, I feel like that should have gone differently. We sort of have two ways that we can react to that. So if you are able, if you'll stand, I'm going to read a little bit from 1 Samuel 25 here in honor of God's word. Starting in verse 2, a certain man in Moab who had property there at Carmel was very wealthy. He had 1,000 goats, 3,000 sheep, which he was shearing in Carmel. His name was Nabal, and his wife's name was Abigail. She was an intelligent and beautiful woman, but her husband was surly and mean. In his dealings, he was a Calebite. While David was in the wilderness, he heard that Nabal was shearing sheep. So he sent 10 young men and said to them, go up to Nabal at Carmel and greet him in my name. Say to him, long life to you, good health to you and your household, and good health to all that is yours. Now I hear that it is sheep shearing time. When your shepherds were with us, we did not mistreat them, and the whole time they were at Carmel, nothing of theirs was missing. Ask your servants, and they will tell you, therefore, be favorable toward my men. Since we, your son David, since we come to you at festive time, please give your servant and your son David whatever you can find for them. When David's men arrived, they gave Nabal this message in David's name, and then they waited. You'll pray with me. God, thank you so much for today. Thank you so much for just your word and what we're learning through David as a man that is seeking your heart, Lord. And I just pray that you fall like rain in this place today, Lord, that we see how amazing your relationship is and that we continue to seek. And if we don't have that relationship yet, or if there are people in this room, Lord, I pray that you fall on them and they feel your presence and they feel your love in this space today. In your name we pray, amen. Y'all can have a seat. So before I deep dive into those choices, I'm going to set a little bit of groundwork here and see a little bit of what we learn from this text. So we meet two characters, Nabal and his wife, Abigail. We learn that Nabal and his family are very wealthy. We learn this because he has land in more than one place, And he also has quite a bit of livestock. He has 1,000 goats and 3,000 sheep. So why is this important? Sheep were money in that time because they used the wool from the sheep to pay bills. So you can imagine, you do the math there, 3,000 sheep, that's quite a bit of money. And then the text also provides some more information about how the society sort of saw Nabal and his wife Abigail in this text. So we see that society thought Abigail was awesome. It says that, she was beautiful and she was intelligent. And then you're probably thinking, okay, well, Nabal, what does that mean? Nabal literally translates to fool. So Nabal was an idiot. We'll just say that. And then it goes a step further, and it also says that he was from the house of Caleb. So the house of Caleb literally translates to the house of dog. So people in society didn't see him as a very affluent person. He wasn't in high esteem in the community. He was the fool from the house of dog. So we learn that people really like Abigail. She's smart. And then we learn that Nabal is very foolish, not very smart, and mean to other people. So I just want to sort of set that groundwork there too. And for those of you that may not have heard David's story, we have also heard the last couple of weeks that David has been anointed to be king. So he has been told that he is going to be the king, but he has not been appointed to that position yet. He does not have the keys to the kingdom to be in charge yet. So he is in a season of waiting. And who can tell me what David did before he started serving King Saul in his capacity? Does anybody remember what David was? He was a shepherd, that's right. So in this story, we see that David had sort of not reverted back, but was doing what he knew in his time of fleeing from Saul. So him and his 600 men are protecting Nabal's flock here. So David is providing a very valuable service to Nabal. You could imagine, 3,000 sheep. It has a couple of shepherds. In that time, they didn't really have fences or ways to protect their livestock or protect their investment. So David was literally acting sort of like a bank for Nabal here. He was protecting the people that were protecting his investment. So he provided a very important service, but he also was just sort of serving where God had him. And this sort of resonates with me and my story I told you all that I felt a call to ministry when I was in high school, but I, went to college for 7 years. I met my wife in high school right before we left. A lot of people go to college for 7 years. No, I'm not a doctor. So those of you that have seen Tommy Boy, we have similar stories. In that time, I worked in what I felt at the time were random jobs or jobs that I didn't necessarily feel like were a benefit for me. I worked at Home Depot for years and started as a lot associate, just pushing carts in and helping people load their truck, but was like, oh, I get to talk to people about God in the parking lot. So that was super cool. I loved that, and eventually worked my way up to managing basically every department in Home Depot. And then we'll talk a little bit about a different opportunity that I had a little bit later, but it was one of those things where I was serving in the moment, and I feel like that's what David was doing, and I think it sort of speaks to when you feel like you have been anointed to do something, but you're serving in what you see as a lesser role, you can build up a little bit of tension in your spirit, and I think we might see that here in a little bit. But a super important thing here that we see in the text is not that David went to Nabal for payment. That's not necessarily the super important part because, again, he provided a very valuable service. It's the way that David went to Nabal for payment. It was how he asked. He sent 10 young men, and it says in verse 6, long life to you, good health to you and your household, and good health to all that is yours. The text literally translates to shalom, 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 peace to you, peace to your family, peace to your house. He's coming to him in love and in grace and saying, hey, we provided this service to you. Your people will tell you the same thing. I would love, if you could help us out a little bit for that. And then it also helps if you look at when Nabal went. So Nabal went during sheep shearing time. That's a fun tongue twister to say on stage. But he went during the harvest. He was collecting money. Nabal was getting paid in this moment, right? So imagine you provide a service for someone and you wait to send the invoice until you know. It's like, hey, someone's like, hey, can you post-date that check or don't cash that check till Friday, right? I don't know if people understand that. I don't know if people write checks anymore. But, David's saying, hey, I'm not going to send you the invoice until I know that you have money in the bank. And then it's also super incredible. The most powerful part, I think, is in verse 8. And it says, ask your own servants and they will tell you, therefore be favorable towards my men. Since we come at festive time, please give your servants and your son David whatever you can find for them. So David didn't ask for a certain amount of money here. He didn't ask to be paid X dollars for his service. He didn't write up the invoice that says, well, he had 3,000 sheep at $2 a sheep for X number of days and then submitted for him to be paid. No, he said, whatever your heart desires, however you feel that you can bless me, wherever your generosity leads, that's what I would take for payment. Not, I did you a really big favor, I need you to pay me X dollars. It was a genuine generosity sort of ask. He was like, hey, I know that times are good for you right now, and I'm not gonna try and take advantage of you. Just give me what you think is fair. And I don't know about a lot of you or all of you, but I know that would be hard for me in providing a service for someone. I know if I built a house for someone, and I'd be willing to bet that a lot of the contractors in this room, if you built a house for someone and then it came time to hand over the keys and you and the buyer were talking about having a conversation, and it's like, well, here are the keys, and it's like, well, how much do we owe you? And it's like, whatever you think is fair, or if you're a mechanic and they bring a car to you and it's like, oh, well, how much do I owe you? It's like, whatever you got is fine, whatever you think, That's how David came to Nabal in this moment. So it was not from a place of aggression. It was from a place of, thank you so much for allowing me to serve you. However you can return the favor, it would be appreciated. And so David sends these men, and Nabal in his super wise heart responds in this way. It says, Nabal answers to David's servants, who is this David? Who is the son of Jesse? Many servants are breaking away from their masters these days. Why should I take my bread and my water and my meat that I have slaughtered for my shearers and give it to men coming from who knows where? David's men turned around and went back. When they arrived, they reported every word to David. So Nabal, being super smart, acts like he has no idea who David is. Now let's keep in mind, the whole reason that David is on the run, the only reason that David is in this place is because everybody knew who David was. Everybody knew that Saul kills by the 1,000 and David kills by the 10,000s. We heard the song a couple of weeks ago. You read it earlier on in 1 Samuel. Everybody knew who David was. So in this moment, Nabal's just challenging David's pride. In this moment, he's calling him out and he's challenging him. He's like, I don't know who you are. Like, you could be any Joe Schmo from Lord knows where. And it makes me think, it's like, where are you being challenged today? Are you being challenged at work? Like, is someone at work challenging your position? Maybe you're being challenged at home. Maybe there's certain situations in your home where you're feeling challenged, or you're feeling that things aren't necessarily going the way that you think that they should go. Or maybe it's in your own heart, in your own life, where you're not living up to the expectations that you have for yourself. Or you're in a position where it's like, I'm just sort of getting by right now. It's like David serving as a shepherd. Like, he's not the king yet, he's just hiding in caves with his buddies, Where are you at with that? And then that brings us to the first choice that we can make. So we have gotten to where David finally has a choice that he can make, and that choice that I believe David makes in this moment is he chooses to retaliate, which is a little bit of a surprise after the grace that he showed Saul last week. We heard Nolan talk about how he cut the corner off of Saul's robe and he fell to his face and apologized. But let's look and see what David says to his men, because again, we're thinking that he's going to respond very graciously and kind here. But it says, David said to his men, each of you strap up your sword. So they did. And David strapped his sword on as well. About 400 men went up with David, while 200 men stayed back with the supplies. So like I just mentioned, this is quite a bit of a surprise. You would not think that David's like, hey guys, let's strap up. We got some killing to do, like he should be like, we're just going to return good for evil. We're just like we talked about last week, we're going to be nice in this moment, or he would just not respond at all. No, that's not at all what he says. He's like, let's go boys. We got to go take some people out here. And in this moment, David moves to retaliate against Nabal. And so what are those moments for you? What are those moments in your life where, we just thought about a little bit of some of those things, but what are those moments in your life where you move to retaliate? I have 4 kids under 9 right now. So there's a lot of little retaliations happening in my house. It's like, my brother hit me, I hit him back. You took my toy, I take it back. You called me a cotton-headed knitting muggins, I call you whatever. But those things grow, like you and your wife have an argument, so I'm gonna be petty and I'm not gonna take the trash out. Or I get asked to load the dishwasher one more time, and instead of doing that nicely, because I don't want to do it, I slam everything of Tupperware into the dishwasher or throw it into the cabinet. Or maybe we retaliate in a different way. Maybe you didn't get the promotion at work, and instead of handling that situation with grace, you gossip about the person all day. Or maybe your boss puts a new rule in place or a new sort of process in place, and you don't agree with it. You do it because you respect that person and who they are as a leader, but instead of doing it happily and with grace, you complain about it to your coworkers every time that you do it. So a super important thing that we see here, and I think that is super important that we've noticed David do in the past, is that David has always gone to God in these situations. We see that in the Psalms, but in this moment, David just reacts. David doesn't stop to think. He doesn't stop to pray. David doesn't go to God. He just reacts in this moment. And we talked about this last week. Just because we have been given opportunities, it doesn't mean that they are signs from God that we're supposed to move in any certain direction. And I think that this is the super important part, and allow me to talk a little bit more about my call. 5 years before, or 5 years after I left Home Depot, so I'm serving at Home Depot for 5 years. Then I had another job for 5 years. I had the honor and privilege of working for my mother-in-law. I didn't get as much of a reaction there as I thought that I would. I absolutely love my mother-in-law. She is incredible. She's a very strong believer. And in that time, she was very gracious in letting me continue to serve Wednesday nights. She let me leave for camp, be off of work for a week at a time, or anytime there was, hey, there's a student event, I'd really like to go be with my guy. She was like, go do your thing. Everything's gonna be fine here. We got you covered. And I think that it's super important because in that moment, I was continuing to seek God for wisdom when it would have been very easy for me to just be where I was at. And I think that it's very important for us to remember that we need to continue to seek God. And we see David doing this in last week when we were in chapter 24. It says, he said to his men, "The Lord forbid that I should do such a thing to my master, the Lord's anointed, or lay my hand on him. He is the anointed of the Lord." So we can see that, David felt remorse because he was in relationship with God. He knew that he had done wrong by cutting off Saul's robe. And then a couple weeks before that, we can see that he's in relationship with God. Right before he takes on Goliath in 1 Samuel 17, it says, David said to the Philistines, "You come against me with sword and spear and javelin, but I come against you in the name of the Lord Almighty, the God of the armies of Israel, who you have defied. This day the Lord will deliver you into my hands, and I will strike you down, and I will cut off your head." You see, in our chapter today, David stopped moving and acting in accordance with what God had anointed him to do. David stopped trusting in the Lord to use him. He stopped trusting that he was going to get him to where he needed to be. And it's so easy for us to fall into that trap. It's so easy for us to stop seeking God when we feel like we're not living up to the expectations that we have set for ourselves, when we're not achieving what we feel that we have been anointed for. See, I felt anointed when I was in high school, and it's like, why are you not appointing me? Why have you not put me where you need to be? And how selfish is that of me to look that way, right? How inappropriate is that to not just trust that, no, God has you where he needs to be, and it's how can I continue to serve in that moment? So this story sort of moves on. I started serving way more at the Bridge. At this point, I was in the church more nights than I was not in the church. That's not a brag. It's just the truth. And I can remember one Sunday we were having baptisms outside, and Pastor Phil pulls me in and he's like, hey, I think we need a new facilities person, and I think that you might be the person for the job. And at that moment, I was just like, wait, what? Kind of freaked out a little bit. And I'm like, in my mind, I was like, okay, well, we got to pray through this. I called my wife on my way home, and I was just like, hey, this happened. And she was like, say what? So we began to pray, and I sought counsel from other people, and all knowing that the signs would lead me to, I really need to take this calling, right? And the important part here is that, and then in my mind too, I hear, oh no, I've got to tell Lisa that I've got to step away from, basically she was theoretically in the future, she was handing me over her little black book of business, setting me up to provide for my family like I could have never imagined. And, but I think what's important is if we lose sight of what God has called us to do, we lose that when we stop seeking him. If we stop looking for him for that wisdom, if we stop looking to our community for wisdom, then that's when we stop realizing what it is that he has called us to. And so I want you to hear this say, my story is, yes, I was serving in vocational ministry, but that may not be your story. You are right where God needs you to be. How are you serving God in the boardroom? How are you serving God in the break room? How are you serving God in those conversations that you're having with just a random person on the side of the road? Nolan mentioned last week, if you get a flat tire, it's like, that's not a sign that you need to go get a new car. No, that's a sign that you need to talk to the person that's helping you change the tire on the side of the road about how their day is going. And how can you may ask, Joseph, how do you know that David's doing that besides of the verses that we just read through? It's and my thing is we have the book of Psalms, and I believe that the book of Psalms is such a blessing to us because we get glimpses into all of the sort of giants of the story's relationship with God. But with David, we're super blessed because we have like an entire book. It's like we have his journal, and it goes from just a super real relationship with God. It's like, Lord, break the teeth out of my enemies' mouths, or wipe my enemies off the face of the earth, or you be magnified by my life. It goes from happy to sad to angry and then back again. It's the whole array of emotions. And I think it's very important, and I hope that we don't miss that in order for us to make smart decisions and make wise decisions, we have to be having those conversations with God and seeking him for the answers and seeking him for the wisdom that he has for us. And we can see that David continuously did that in the book of Psalm. Which leads me to my second point. So we can choose to retaliate, or we can choose to reconcile. And where we see the reconciliation may be a little bit of a surprise, but in order to save a little bit of time, I'm going to paraphrase the last half of the chapter. There's a lot of reading and the Lord be honored and all that kind of stuff, which is great, but I only have 30 minutes to talk to you guys. So Abigail speaks with one of the sheep shearers who was in the room when Nabal loses his mind. And as you can imagine, he was a little freaked out. Because the dude that took down the giant Philistine, Goliath, I know you all have heard the story. The guy that took him out just got told, who are you? And nah, I'm not going to help you out, So you could imagine that he was a little freaked out when he was talking to Abigail. And Abigail, in her wisdom, she's like, I've got to fix this situation. So she's going to run down and grab a few things to take to David to try and smooth things over. So here are the couple things that she grabbed. She grabbed 200 loaves of bread. 2 skins of wine, 5 dressed sheep that were ready to roast or that were already ready to cook, 5 sehas of roasted grain, 100 cakes of raisins, don't those sound delicious, and 200 cakes of preserved figs, and loaded them on donkeys. So just a couple things, just whatever you have in the cupboard, don't. So this also goes back to how foolish Nabal was. So he had all this stuff sort of laying around, like this is stuff that wasn't in the banquet hall. This was just hanging out in the kitchen, in the pantry, so he had to give to David and just chose not to. And so after she collects all of these things, she decides, I'm going to go out the back door and I'm going to go speak with David. And she went out the back so that Nabal wouldn't see her. She's coming down from up at the house, and she's coming down this ravine. And on the other side of the ravine, she hears shouting, and she hears David say, "May the Lord strike me down if I don't kill all the men of the house of Nabal by sunrise." So David, again, strap up, boys, we got killing to do. He's really mad. He's not happy. How does he not know who I am? All of those things. And what happens next is just shocking. When Abigail saw David, she quickly got off of her donkey and bowed down before David with her face to the ground. She fell at his feet and said, "Pardon your servant, my Lord, and let me speak to you. Hear what your servant has to say." Doesn't this sound just oddly familiar? Last week, after David cuts off the corner of Saul's shirt, he falls to his face and he begs for Saul to forgive him. Now let's notice something here. Abigail has done nothing wrong. She comes down the hill with her adult Lunchable. She hasn't wronged anybody, right? She's just there to try and make peace for Nabal, right? And so in this moment, Abigail reminds David of who he is. She says, "David, don't you know that you're going to be king? Don't you remember that God has set you apart to rule everybody? This is all going to be yours. But if you go and you slaughter these people, if you go and you hurt these people, what is that going to do to your reputation? How is that going to allow you to be king?" There's super important things here that she's saying to him. One, because if he had gone and done this, it would have given Saul a legitimate reason to go and actually seek after him. Because right now, Saul really doesn't have a reason to be hunting him down outside of "my feelings are hurt." So this would have given him a legitimate reason to stop David. But I think the most important part of this, after we see, she reminds David of who he is. She tells David, "Don't forget, you're the anointed one. Don't forget, you have purpose. Don't forget, what you're here doing is important. God sees you in this moment. I know you don't feel like it. I know you've been waiting X number of years, and it's going to be about 20 before you get appointed to your kingship." But in that moment, David hears all of this, and David says to Abigail, he says, "Abigail, praise be to the Lord, the God of Israel, who has sent you today to meet me. May you be blessed for your good judgment and for keeping me from bloodshed this day and from avenging myself with my own hands." So I mentioned that Abigail's super smart. Anybody's wife in this room way smarter than they are? If you're married and you're a man, you should put your hand up. Abigail uses this moment to remind David of who he is in God. And I think that's so important that we have. I mentioned, the importance of having community and having those people that you can rely on to go back. When I went to Lisa and had that really hard conversation, I'm not going to look at her, she's in the room, because I'll cry like I did that morning. She asked me 2 questions. She said, or actually she only asked me 1 question. She said, "Did you pray about it?" And I said, "Yes, ma'am, you know that I did." And she said, "Well, I've known that you've had this calling on your life since I met you 15 years ago." And gave me a hug, and she didn't ask me when I was gonna stop. She didn't ask me any of those things. She reminded me of who I was and what God had called me to in that moment. And I think how another thing that we see here that's very important, and I pray that we don't miss it, is that David didn't just move on. David heard what Abigail said in this moment. So when we have those people in our lives and we have that community and they give you counsel and they give you things to help you in hard situations, it's so important that we don't just keep moving. David didn't go on and kill everybody in the village. David says, oh, right. I'm supposed to be king. I can't do this. Shame on me. And he leaves, right? So the story ends, I won't leave you on a cliffhanger. The story ends with Abigail going back to Nabal. And Nabal's been partying all afternoon, so he's had a little too many drinks. He's a little drunk. So Abigail, again, shows how wise she is. It actually says very drunk in the text, so not a little drunk. Abigail's super smart, so she's like, well, I'm not going to talk to a drunk idiot because, again, Nabal's an idiot. So I'm going to wait till he wakes up in the morning and just talk to a normal fool. I won't talk to a drunk fool. I'll talk to a normal fool. So we pick up in the text in verse 37, and it says, then in the morning when Nabal was sober, his wife told him all of these things, and his heart failed him, and he became like a stone. Had a heart attack, right? And about 10 days later, the Lord struck Nabal down, and he died. I'm not saying that God is going to take out your enemies or any of those types of things. He can. But I am telling you that God will help you take care of what it is that you give to him to help take care of. Another incredible thing here is that when we look at Abigail's choice to reconcile, we look at Abigail choosing to reconcile this situation. She went to David with a couple of things, right? She went to Nabal with an apology. She went to him and said, Lord, forgive me, or not Lord, but forgive me, David. She didn't do anything wrong, but she also brought payment. She brought what it was that she thought was what was needed for David to pay him back. And if this doesn't sound like the picture of the gospel, then I don't know what does. Jesus showed up for us, looked at his Father and said, no, forgive them. Forgive me for what they did. And then he brought ultimate payment for us on the cross. And so this morning, I'd like for us to sort of sit and think about this. We are going to do communion here in a second, but I think it's so important to do, to offer salvation to those people in this room that may not have heard or may not had a chance to accept what it was that Jesus has done for us, that Jesus came to this place, took our sins on for us, and died for us on a cross to forgive us from those things. He is taking care of everything for us. And so if you do need to make that choice today, if that is something that you are feeling in your heart that the Lord is starting to stir in you, I want you to know that we're going to say a prayer in just a second, and it's not the words of this prayer that are saving you. It's that feeling in your heart to trust that you can turn from the life that you're living and trust that Jesus has already taken care of what it is that you're struggling with. All of those expectations that you're not meeting, all of those doubts that you have in your life that you're not completing what it is that he has set apart for you. And so if you guys will bow your head with me and we'll pray real quick.